The line at the downtown bank was long, but all eyes turned when the teller's voice grew sharp. A black woman in a crisp navy suit had just handed over her ID and requested a large withdrawal. Instead of the routine shuffle of papers and keys clicking, the teller frowned, then called for the manager. Minutes later, 2 security guards appeared. Whispers floated through the lobby, something about fraud, stolen identity, or maybe even theft. The woman stood calmly, her posture unshaken, but inside she felt a storm rising. When the manager finally arrived, his words carried an unmissable chill. "Ma'am, for security reasons, we cannot process this withdrawal. We believe this account does not belong to you." The woman's jaw tightened. She had built empires, signed million-dollar deals, and sat at the head of boardroom tables filled with men who doubted her every move. But this, being denied access to her own money in public, was something different. Then, with the entire lobby watching, she said words that froze the air. "I own this bank." The crowd fell into stunned silence. Some chuckled nervously. Others stared wide-eyed, unsure if they had heard her correctly. The security guards exchanged confused looks, hesitating for the first time. And the manager? His face drained of color. The woman before him was not just a customer. She was the CEO, the majority shareholder, the very person who signed his paycheck. What began as an ordinary day at the bank had suddenly transformed into a moment of raw truth about race, power, and respect. Jordan Ellis had walked into the downtown branch of her bank that morning with the same calm confidence that had carried her through boardroom battles and billion-dollar deals. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, her heels clicking against the marble floor, she carried herself with a quiet authority. For her, this was supposed to be a simple errand: make a large withdrawal, sign a few documents, and be on her way to a meeting across town. But the moment she handed her ID and withdrawal slip to the teller, she felt the air shift. The young woman behind the counter frowned, glanced at the computer screen, then back at Jordan, her eyes narrowing slightly as if something didn't add up. "Just one moment, please," the teller said, her tone polite but suspicious. She stood up quickly and disappeared into the back office. Jordan exhaled slowly, resting her hands on the counter. She was used to moments like this. The disbelief, the hesitation, the subtle undercurrent of doubt. None of it was new. Still, it irritated her. She had spent her life building credibility brick by brick, only to have it questioned in the most ordinary of settings. When the teller returned, she wasn't alone. A tall man in a gray suit, clearly the branch manager, walked beside her. He introduced himself stiffly, then asked Jordan to confirm her name, her address, and the account details she had already provided. She complied, her voice calm, but she could feel the tension rising in the room. A couple people in line craned their necks, curious about the delay. The manager tapped on the computer, frowned, then looked back at her with a doubtful expression. "Ms. Ellis," he began cautiously, "I'm afraid we can't process this withdrawal right now. For security reasons, we'll need to verify ownership of this account further. We have reason to believe this account may not belong to you." Jordan's heartbeat slowed, not quickened. It was a familiar kind of insult, dressed up in professional language. She stared at him evenly, every inch of her posture radiating poise. "You believe I don't own the account I opened myself? The account under my name?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with steel. The manager cleared his throat. "We just want to make sure everything is legitimate." That was when 2 security guards appeared, summoned quietly by the teller. The lobby grew hushed, customers whispering as they watched the scene unfold. Jordan felt the heat of their stares, but she refused to shrink under it. She had endured too much, climbed too high, to be shaken by this moment. She straightened her shoulders, fixed her gaze on the manager, and delivered the words that would stop the entire lobby cold. "I own this bank." The guards froze mid-step. The teller blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. And the manager's face drained of color, his authority crumbling in an instant. The marble floors, the glass walls, the faint hum of the air conditioning, all seemed to fall silent at once. Jordan didn't flinch. She meant every word. The silence in the bank lobby lingered like heavy fog after Jordan's declaration. Customers stared wide-eyed, some with disbelief, others with quiet fascination. The security guards, once ready to escort her out, now shifted uncomfortably, exchanging looks as if silently asking each other what to do next. The manager's lips parted, but no words came out. He looked at Jordan as though she had just flipped the script of reality itself. For a moment, the entire room felt suspended, caught between skepticism and the dawning realization of truth. Jordan did not move, did not blink. Her presence alone was enough to hold the space. Finally, the manager stammered, "Ma'am, forgive me, but could you please clarify what you mean by that?" His voice cracked slightly, betraying his unease. Jordan slowly reached into her sleek leather handbag, pulling out her phone. With deliberate precision, she tapped through a few screens and turned the device toward him. There was the undeniable evidence, her ownership certificate and digital records linking her to the bank's parent company. Her name, Jordan Ellis, was printed boldly at the top, marked with official seals and signatures. The manager leaned in, his face reddening, his hands trembling as he recognized the document for what it was. The murmur of the crowd grew louder. A man in line whispered, "She wasn't lying," while another customer, an elderly woman, muttered, "Imagine thinking you could tell the owner she doesn't belong here." The teller's cheeks burned as she avoided Jordan's eyes, suddenly aware of the gravity of her actions. The guards, who had been prepared to remove her, now stepped back entirely, retreating toward the wall like scolded school children. Jordan let the silence stretch before speaking again. Her voice was low, but carried the weight of thunder. "The problem here is not a missing document. The problem is the assumption that someone like me could not possibly hold power. You saw my skin, you saw my gender, and you decided I was suspect. You tried to humiliate me in front of strangers, in my own bank." Her words rang through the room, striking not just the staff but the customers as well. Heads bowed slightly, as if the truth itself demanded a quiet respect. The manager swallowed hard, fumbling for words. I deeply apologize, Ms. Ellis. This was a misunderstanding, a mistake." His voice trembled with fear of consequences, not just from his employer, but from the woman who quite literally held his career in her hands. But Jordan did not soften. She thought of every deal where men had spoken over her, every room where her presence had been questioned, every door she had forced open when it was slammed in her face. Today was not about money. It was about principle. "The mistake," she said firmly, "was forgetting that ownership doesn't always look like what you expect. The mistake was in believing I needed your permission to access what already belongs to me." The crowd erupted in quiet applause. It wasn't loud or theatrical, but it carried the energy of collective acknowledgement. For the first time, the manager lowered his gaze, stripped of his authority. Jordan stood tall, her withdrawal still pending, but her dignity firmly intact. And in that moment, the story of her power began to ripple far beyond the walls of that bank. As Jordan walked out of the bank with her withdrawal finally in hand, the murmurs of the crowd followed her like an echo. People pulled out their phones, whispering her name, typing furiously into social media apps. By the time she stepped into the sunlight, the story had already begun to spread. A passerby had filmed the entire scene, capturing her calm authority and those 4 unforgettable words, "I own this bank." Within hours, the clip was circulating online, gathering comments, praise, and outrage. Jordan didn't need to check her notifications to know what was happening. She could feel in the way strangers looked at her with a new kind of recognition. But as she slid into the backseat of her car, the weight of the moment settled on her chest. She leaned back against the leather, closing her eyes for a brief pause. The confrontation had left her outwardly unshaken, but internally it stirred old wounds, memories of times when she had been dismissed, belittled, or outright denied her place at the table. She thought back to her early days, when she pitched her first big idea to investors only to hear, "You don't look like a CEO." She remembered walking into boardrooms where her authority was constantly questioned, her words ignored until repeated by someone else. Today's encounter had felt like a condensed version of all those battles, compressed into a single moment in a lobby full of strangers. Her phone buzzed. It was her assistant, nearly breathless on the other end of the line. "Jordan, you're trending." That video is everywhere. Twitter, TikTok, news blogs. Everyone's talking about it. They're calling you the CEO who owns the bank, Jordan opened her eyes and let out a small, almost amused sigh. She hadn't planned for this. She hadn't sought the spotlight. Yet fate had chosen this moment to put her fight on display. By evening, television hosts were replaying the footage. Analysts were debating what it revealed about race and power in America, and hashtags bearing her name were climbing the charts. Some praised her strength, calling her a symbol of resilience and leadership. Others questioned whether the confrontation had been exaggerated, unable to believe that a black woman could truly stand at the helm of such an institution. Jordan knew both responses well. Admiration and doubt had always come as a pair in her journey. She sat at her desk that night, looking out at the city lights from her penthouse window. The skyline glowed with the promise of progress, but to her it also whispered reminders of the barriers that still stood. She tapped her fingers thoughtfully against the polished wood, considering her next move. This was no longer just about a withdrawal. It had become a statement, a story larger than herself. And if the world wanted to watch, then perhaps she could use this moment to teach it something about ownership, dignity, and the quiet power of refusing to bow. The next morning, Jordan woke up to a flood of headlines. Her face was plastered across news sites with bold titles. Black CEO shocks bank staff. I own this bank. And viral confrontation exposes racial bias in banking. Social media was ablaze with debates. Thousands applauded her composure, calling her a role model, while others downplayed the incident, claiming she had overreacted. Some even questioned whether the video had been staged, their disbelief rooted in the same prejudice that fueled the confrontation. Jordan scrolled through the posts not with anger, but with a cool, steady awareness. She had long understood that visibility always came with resistance. For every voice that cheered her on, another would try to tear her down. As she prepared for the day, her phone rang. It was a member of the board. Jordan, the clip has made waves far beyond the city. The voice said cautiously, some investors are nervous. They're asking if this will affect the bank's reputation. Jordan took a deep breath before answering. The only thing damaging our reputation is discrimination on display in our own lobby. If anything, this is our chance to confront it publicly and lead the change. Her conviction was unshakable, but she knew she was walking a fine line. Powerful figures rarely like being forced into uncomfortable conversations, even when change was necessary. By midday, critics had surfaced on talk shows, questioning her leadership style. Is she too confrontational? One commentator asked. A real leader would have handled it privately, another suggested. Jordan watched the clips with an arched brow, amused at how easily her strength was recast as aggression. She had seen this before. When men raised their voices, they were called assertive. When she simply stated facts, she was labeled intimidating. Still, she refused to let the noise distract her. Meanwhile, support poured in from unexpected places. Emails from young entrepreneurs arrived by the dozens, thanking her for standing tall. You don't know me, one woman wrote. But when I saw you say those words, I finally believed I could walk into rooms that weren't built for me. Another message came from a teenager. My mom showed me the video. I've never seen anyone who looks like us owning a bank. Now I believe I can do anything. Jordan read each note slowly, feeling the weight of their hope press against her heart. These voices mattered far more than the critics on TV. That evening, she sat with her team in her office, the city glowing beneath the floor-to-ceiling windows. This moment isn't about me alone, she told them. It's about what it represents. If the world insists on making this a story, then we'll make sure it's one that pushes the needle forward. Her staff nodded, energized by her resolve. She wasn't just defending herself. She was transforming a viral clip into a movement. Still, Jordan knew storms brought lightning as well as rain. The days ahead would test her resolve more than ever. But as she looked at the skyline, she reminded herself that change was never born in silence. Weeks passed, and what began as a confrontation in a bank lobby had grown into something far larger. Jordan's name had become synonymous with courage and ownership, her story told in classrooms, boardrooms, and community centers across the country. The video continued to circulate, not just as a viral clip, but as a symbol, a reminder that power could come from unexpected places, and that prejudice still lingered even in spaces built on trust. Jordan hadn't asked for the spotlight, but she embraced it, knowing she carried more than her own reputation. She carried the hopes of those who saw themselves reflected in her. Still, the road was not without resistance. Some investors withdrew, uneasy with the controversy. Certain newspapers painted her as a provocateur rather than a pioneer. Jordan faced meetings filled with tense silences and pointed questions about her leadership. But she remained steady, never raising her voice, never backing down. For her, the struggle was familiar. She had climbed too far to allow fear or doubt to dictate her path. And each time she spoke publicly at conferences and interviews or her own employees, her message cut through the noise. Ownership is not about privilege. It's about possibility. And possibility should never be limited by race, gender, or expectation. Gradually, the tide began to shift. Communities rallied behind her, inspired not just by her wealth but by her resilience. Young women wrote essays about her. Students cited her as proof that success was possible, and professionals whispered her name in boardrooms as both an example and a warning. Underestimating someone like Jordan Ellis was a mistake. The bank itself, once a stage of humiliation, transformed under her leadership. She instituted new training, demanded accountability, and made it clear that bias, whether subtle or overt, had no place in the institution she owned. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Jordan stood on the balcony of her penthouse, looking out at the city skyline. The lights blinked like a constellation of endless possibilities. She thought back to the moment in the bank, the suspicious eyes of the teller, the hesitation of the manager, the guards who nearly escorted her out. It could have been just another painful memory, one more story of doubt and disrespect. Instead, it had become a turning point, a spark that lit conversations across the nation. She realized that sometimes history doesn't arrive neatly planned. Sometimes it comes crashing through ordinary days, demanding courage in the face of insult. Jordan smiled softly to herself. She had not only defended her dignity, but had opened a door for others to walk through. The journey wasn't finished. There would always be new battles, new barriers to break. But she had proven something powerful, not just to the strangers in that lobby, but to the world itself. Ownership had a new face, and it was hers. And with that, she turned away from the skyline, ready for whatever came next. The story had ended, but her legacy had only just begun. Backhand index pointing right if the story moved you. Don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Backhand index pointing right, subscribe to The Black Struggle for more powerful stories that inspire change.